All right, I don't see any more people joining us, so I think we can get started with this webinar. Thank you everyone for your patience. We are pleased to start this webinar, which is to highlight the successful assessment of 29 key biodiversity areas in Mozambique. And the webinar will be presented by the Mozambique partners. Let me just start by introducing myself, and maybe let me turn on my video so that you can all see me. My name is Daniel Marnwick. I work for the IUCN Eastern and Southern African Regional Office, coordinating the green list for protected and conserved areas in Eastern and Southern Africa. But today I'm in my role as the chair of the Key Biodiversity Areas community, as well as the Africa representative. And just to give you some brief background, the KBA Community is a platform that was established when the KBA partnership was established back in 2016, 2017. And the purpose is really to create a platform for the broader community of practice from NGOs, governments, experts, protected area practitioners, anyone who is engaging with key biodiversity areas, for that community to exchange lessons learned, experiences, to showcase success stories, and to provide training. So the community is set up, it communicates via Google Groups, a Facebook page, and emails. And so the community is really pleased to host this webinar today, to really showcase this successful national initiative to do these assessments in Mozambique. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves in the chat box. So if you could just briefly give us your name and your affiliation and the country you're from in the chat box, we'll appreciate that. This webinar is being recorded, and we will provide a link to the recording after the webinar. We're also providing translations, so there will be a presentation that will be in Portuguese. So if you'd like to hear the English translation, you can click on the translate button at the bottom of your screen to your preferred language. And the same if you would like to hear the presentations in Portuguese, you can just change the language to Portuguese. So I think without further ado, let's get the show started. You can see the agenda on your screen there. We will start with a presentation from Dr. Andy Plumtree, who heads up the KBA Secretariat in Cambridge. Then over to Dr. Matumele to provide a background to the project. And then a presentation of the Mozambique National Coordination Group. And then to Dr. Hugo Costa to present the main outputs of this project. You'll then have an opportunity to ask questions to the presenters. You can do that both either by raising your hand or posting your question in the chat box, and someone will answer it. And then we'll wrap up hopefully at around 11:30. So on that note, I would like to hand over to Dr. Andy Plumtree now, please, for a global overview.
Daniel, let me just share my screen. It's not the one I thought I was sharing. Sec. Already, I'm on a OneDrive system that I need to sign in on. It's just come up. It's not seeing my PowerPoint. I'm just going to close the PowerPoint.
Maybe just share your desktop. Maybe it's easier.
Okay, that looks better. Are you seeing that?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give a quick summary of where the current KBA program is at the moment, particularly in the application of the KBA standard. And KBA's come from an idea that there's a need to identify areas of importance for biodiversity. And the Convention of Biological Diversity in 2010 set a target, Aichi Target 11, that at least 17% of terrestrial and inland water and 10% of coastal areas, especially in areas, are protected, especially in areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And even the current language that we have in the current draft of the Convention of Biological Diversity Global Biodiversity Framework for Target 2 is talking about 30% now of the planet with a focus on areas of particular importance for biodiversity. So there have been many different ways of identifying sites of importance for biodiversity. Some at very different scales. Hotspots, for instance, which came out of Conservation International's planning, identified fairly large areas of the world, whereas things like prime butterfly areas or important plant areas can be quite small sites. And four, there was a recognized need that needed to harmonize all of these different approaches for identifying important areas for biodiversity. And a long consultation process was started with testing of criteria. And eventually this ended up with the publication of the global standard for the identification of key biodiversity areas in 2016. And at the same time, we launched the KBA partnership, which is now 13 of the leading nature conservation organizations. And the KBA sector effectively works for those 13 KBA partners to roll out the KBA program. And the idea is that key biodiversity areas form a unifying framework that captures the different ideas in how to identify sites of importance for conservation and uses them in one approach and set of criteria. And the formal definition of key biodiversity areas are sites that contribute significantly to the global persistence of biodiversity. The KBA program is working with countries around the world to set up KBA national coordination groups, NCGs, we refer to them in short. We currently have 11 NCGs formally established, those countries in green, but we have a lot of other countries which are showing interest in establishing national coordination groups. That means that they have people within country who are working to raise the funding to set up these groups and to put them in place. And some of the countries that are likely to form new KBA national coordination groups include Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, where there's funding just being obtained from the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund to BirdLife, WCS and WWF in that region. And then other countries in Africa, Cameroon, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Sao Tome and Principe are all planning on establishing their NCGs. And Zambia and Argentina are planning also to set up meetings with the aim of establishing NCGs at those meetings. Mozambique was one of the first countries to formally establish a KBA National Coordination Group. And it's really exciting to be hearing today about the results of the work of that group in identification of key biodiversity areas across a of taxonomic groups of species. The World Database of Key Biodiversity Areas currently records 16,343 key biodiversity areas, But as you can see from the pie chart on the right, most of the species that trigger a KBA are bird species, the blue segment of that pie chart. And that's because it builds on the important bird and biodiversity areas program. And this is why we're encouraging countries to make assessments across a wide set of taxonomic groups. And as I said, Mozambique is one of the first countries to do that. The pie chart on the left also shows the coverage of key biodiversity areas by protected areas. Only about 18.7% of key biodiversity areas having complete coverage, that green segment. Protected area coverage of key biodiversity areas is one of the indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals 14 and 15 and of Aichi Target 11. And it's likely to be adopted as one of the indicators of the CBD post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as well. But when you actually look at coverage, so the percentage of protected areas that are covering KBAs, what you see that in 2010, about 25 to 30% of protected areas covered KBAs, and now only 17 to 18% of protected areas cover KBAs. So although in the last 10 years, there was a big increase in setting up of protected areas, so we had just about achieved 17% as the target for terrestrial area of protected areas. What we're seeing is that many of those protected areas are not being in places which are globally important for biodiversity, and that the importance of identifying key biodiversity areas and guiding where these protected areas should be put means that the KBAs should be a tool that's used over the next to decide where the 30% target that we're going to aim for, or it's looking pretty likely that we're going to be aiming for, where that should be put. Key biodiversity areas should be one of the tools that's really guiding where those new protected areas and new other effective conservation measures, OECMs, are going to be put. So it's important that, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is change the target language for target 2 to make sure that getting the important biodiversity areas up front and not the target of the 30%, because it's putting those protected areas in the right places that's the most important thing. There's also an IUCN motion that's been passed it was voted on by several different government entities, 126 government entities and 606 IUCN partners, and got very strong support. And this motion is all about spatial planning, the need for countries to do spatial planning. And KBAs in this motion are a key component of that spatial planning, that countries should be developing spatially explicit conservation plans, and that KBAs should be identified fairly comprehensively across taxonomic groups within the country. And we'll be hearing about Mozambique's application of this. Not only have they identified the key biodiversity areas, but those key biodiversity areas have been incorporated into the national territorial plan for the country, and that's really exciting to see. There's recently been quite a bit of attention on IPLCs, Indigenous peoples and local communities. And one of the things I wanted to point out also is that recent work shows that about 36% of key biodiversity areas fall within IPLC lands, and that IPLCs are going to be a very important tool as well. But not only the conservation of key biodiversity areas, but in reverse, key biodiversity areas can provide a tool to help ensure the stronger safeguards for such land and for these peoples. So there's a strong link there between KBAs and IPLCs as well. Just so for those of you who don't know about KBAs too much, we have a KBA website. The link is at the bottom there. And you can find out a lot more about key biodiversity areas, how they're used, and the criteria and how to identify them at that site. And as Daniel mentioned, there's the KBA community. And if you're interested in joining up to the KBA community, if you're not already a member, please contact Daniel and he can add you to the KBA community list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy, for that. I will have also placed links to the website and the community in the chat box for anyone who wants the link directly. Yeah, that was a useful overview. Thanks, Andy. I think that creates some good context. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Matumele to provide a resume of the national project that identified and mapped key biodiversity areas in Mozambique.
Maybe, Andy, Daniel, maybe just to remind people that, the attendees, that they can use the interpretation button if they want to hear the presentation in Portuguese. You just need to choose your language. So as people log in, some might not be aware of that. So you just need to push the interpretation button and select the Portuguese language. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone. This is Hermenegildo Matimel speaking here. And I'd like just to first correct that I'm not yet a doctor. So I apologize if that minute that circulated had that title. I'm not yet. I'm still a PhD candidate. So that's not yet my title. And yes, I'm going to share with you all the information on the key biodiversity areas in Mozambique, particularly how we approached and how the process was conducted in the country, and highlight some challenges and strength and looking way forward. So I think Andy has given an overview of the key biodiversity areas concept, which is basically those sites that if they were conserved, probably they will contribute highly for biodiversity persistence, not just at local scale, but globally. So it's a geographical space. It may be on land as well as in water. So everywhere where there are key elements that can highlight the sites or make those sites important are considered key biodiversity areas. So what are they aiming for? The main aim of these initiatives is to really pinpoint those sites that should be looked after more carefully. And they're also important in informing a best way of expanding existing network of conservation areas. We know all that conservation funding for conservation resources are really limited. So it's key to make sure that we allocate those limited resources in places where they can provide significant contribution. So how are they identified? Well, the ICN has developed global standards for the identification of key biodiversity areas. There are 5 categories with 11 criteria, with details on how to apply each of those criteria. So the first criteria, which is A, it's all related to threatened biodiversity. This may be species or ecosystems. So if your country has worked on a red listing of species and ecosystems, then you are ready to apply this criteria. There are those biodiversity elements which are not widely distributed. So for those, you can apply criterion B. And then to some extent, there may be places in the world where disturbance has been minus. And then that's where we talk about ecological integrity. So they're still fairly intact. And also criterion D, it's about biological processes. For example, an area where species are breeding, or they use that ground for breeding, and then that also can be used to assess. And then we have the criterion E, which is about irreplaceability through quantitative analysis. So if you have a very good data set and then you can run those analyses, then you will be able. So it's important to highlight that, to point that Criterion E is still ongoing in terms of developing a proper guidance on how to apply that criteria. But of course, there are some countries that have tried applying these criteria. So how did we take this process in Mozambique? So the first step was to establish a coordinating team. So there were nearly 8 working groups across different taxonomy groups, including the Marine Biodiversity Working Group. With that group, we were able to define priority biodiversity elements. For us, we only worked with species because we did not have an updated version of ecosystems with red listing assessment. So we worked with species. Having defined our priority elements, then we started mobilizing the data for the species that we had selected. For that, there was a huge contribution from several partners, institutions at national level, regional level, as well as international level. And we also then identified in country what institution will be suitable to collaborate as part of the project, including governmental institutions, research institutions, academic and conservation partners, civil society, and private sector. So they were all involved, they were all part of the process. With this ready, then it was now the opportunity or the time to conduct a training. So to apply the criteria, you need to have a little bit of understanding of different concepts and also how to apply the criteria. So Andy Plumpton came to Mozambique to provide training. If you see the image to the right, and we also had a training on the red listing of threatened species, which was conducted by Liz von Staden, to give us an overview in terms of how to conduct red listing of threatened species. We worked with selected groups of fauna species to conduct their red listing, including reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, and freshwater fish. So we had a small amount to do that. Why did we do this? It's key to have as much data as possible in the red listing of threatened species, because it's a good basis to conduct the assessments of the KBAs. With this ready, we continued with training. So we had a group of 8 new graduates that they were happy to work on the project. So their main role was to mobilize, organize the data that we will be working with. And again, Andy was a key player here in providing some insights in terms of how to handle that data and then how to start applying the criteria within small groups or different taxonomy groups. And we also had several opportunity to talk and discuss with different experts across different taxonomy groups. This is an example of experts from the terrestrial mammal group. So with whom we just discussing several issues related to that particular taxonomic group. In Mozambique, we did not apply all the criteria. So this is really important. Depending on the data you have, you may not be able to apply all the criteria. We only applied criterion A, B, and D. So this is just an overview. You can find all this information if you go to the KBA webpage, and then you'll find the global standards for the identification of key biodiversity area. It provides all the details of each. So this is just a quick example I wanted to show you. So to apply the criteria, there are several parameters that you have to take into consideration. It may be a number of, so if you see from the left to the right, the first column is just showing images of species. Then the second column is showing a parameter. So those are several parameters that you can also find that information on the guidelines. It's all with the details. So that information, the parameter can be at local scale or global scale. And then there are different thresholds. So working with species, you have 2 thresholds to meet. This is really important, which the first threshold to meet is the percentage threshold. And the second threshold to be met is the reproductive units threshold. So this means, for example, if we are working with a hippopotamus for the first, the second column, we know the number of mature individuals. This information you can find on the ICN red list because this species has been assessed. It's about 115,000 to 130. That's the global population. At local scale, the area that we were assessing to the far right, you see Chumachatu is the name of the site that we were assessing with about 4,420. This is from the local census from the institution that is overseeing conservation in Mozambique. So you're doing calculations of the percentage, you know that at that local area, you have about 3%, and that's enough for a vulnerable species, as you can see from criteria A1B, okay? So that's second line. You need at least 1% of the global population size and 10 reproductive units. So once you have that, in this case, there are nearly, the experts estimate there's more than 1,000 mature individuals in that particular site. So that would qualify. But don't worry, you don't have to do a lot of calculations by hand. The KBA Secretariat has set already an Excel form with all the formulas, etc. All you need is to get the information on global population, local population, and then fill it into the Excel form, and then it will generate the results for you. So this exercise is repeated. You may have a number of mature, you may have the population size, you may have just a range. So many species have not yet been documented to extent that you can know how many, what the population size is of that species, but you may have a range of a species. That's also, you can do the same, and then you apply the criteria. You know what is the size of the range within the site that you are assessing, and then you can know what percentage it covers and check whether it triggers or not. You may not even have a range. A lot of our plant species have not been developed their range maps. You only have information on number of localities. So you know the number of localities, and you know how many localities you have in a site that you are assessing, and also you can apply the criteria. So the criteria is really inclusive in that way that it has been carefully thought to consider different scenarios of data limitation across the world. The difficult step, once you have assessed, is to delineate. How do you delineate a boundary? That's really tricky. Of course, there are guidelines on how to approach that, but it's really difficult. I just wanted to give you an example using Mount Chiperone, which is in central Mozambique, next to Malawi. So this is just an example, and I'll explain to you how you can do that, but there are several other approaches. So if you see here the image I'm presenting, so the yellow line, it's showing what is the current KBA. So those are the boundaries of the current KBA. But before this site was NIBA. So you need to go through several discussions, talk to people that have said that area as an IBA, discuss with them, and why do you think you need to change the boundary? So the first instance is that ideally we should follow the existing boundary. But if there is enough information to justify that this boundary needs to be changed, then you do that. You do that through approaching people that have set the KBA and have a discussion and provide good information to make sure that to explain and understand and provide information on why are you suggesting changes on this. So for this, we follow it using Google Earth imagery. You can see that the core area is one highlighted by the yellow line. But we also had this map, vegetation map, developed by Q as part of the Darwin Initiative, developed some time ago. And this is, you can see from this vegetation map that there has been a degradation throughout the area that is part of the white line. So you can see that there has been a huge transformation of the area. But the important thing is to consider the trigger elements. The trigger elements are these 4 species. You can see the images and their names. So from the information we have from the experts and also on the IUCN Red List, is that all these species are restricted to an altitude above 1,000 meters. So, and they're only found within the forest bits of within the Mount Speroni, and they are known only from here, except the sunbird, which is also known in other parts of the country, including Malawi. So this is the key information to have, the distribution of the species. So all of these species are found within above 1,000 altitude. So that was the main rationale for us to see that all the outside of the yellow has gone through several transformations as a result of expansion of subsistence farming in the area. And then it will make more sense to just keep the core area as a key biodiversity area. But as I said, you need to go through a lot of consultation. After having done that process of delineating, that you do as a small group in the office. So those working taxonomy groups, they've been doing that. And then you take that information to a wider group. So we organize the KBA delineation workshop where several institutions were part, more than 50 people did attend that, and they were all divided into 4 groups. So we had the picture A, it was the northern region. So we divided the country in 3 regions. So we had north, centre, and south. So A, B, C. And then D was the marine biodiversity working group. So we had those 4 groups to discuss the delineation of the boundaries of the KBAs. So we had proposals, so the drafts, and then we take the drafts to a big meeting like this where we all discuss and then come up with an idea. As a result of that discussion, Mozambique has now 29 KBAs. I'm not going to talk about the number of KBAs proposals that we submitted to the National Coordinating Group and the regional focal point, because the next talk is going to cover that, hopefully. If not, I will provide that information later. So we have in total 29 KBAs. Of those, they are distributed as you can see, so 11 in the north and 9 for central and south. And it covers about 139,947 square kilometers in terms of area. So we had a total of 180 species. It wasn't that huge amount of data, but this is what we had, and we were able to conduct and do this figure of 180 species. It may be just for one site, maybe in South Africa, where they have really, really huge amount of information. But you can still do something with whatever you have. So those KBAs, we have 4%, which about 4 KBAs, they cover marine environment, and 25 are found within terrestrial realm. So as we said, this process was applied across different taxonomic groups, and the taxonomic group that had more information, even in terms of species. So of the 180 species, 57% of those species, which is just above 100, they were only plants. So, and others from other taxonomic groups. So you have about 18 KBAs and 11 KBAs for plants and reptiles. So this is a result of, for the last 15 years, the National Herbarium in Mozambique, in collaboration with other institutions, they have been mobilizing huge amount of data, working closely with Q and working closely with Sambi and Buffalo Kloof Nature Reserve Herbarium. So we were able to generate a huge amount of data. And using findings from the Tropical Important Plant Areas, which is an initiative led by Q and implemented by the National Herbarium in Mozambique, we were able to do red listing of a higher number of species and also make that data available through the ICN red list and also through GBIF. So that information is really is readily available now to anyone to use. But the reptiles also, it is a result of several expeditions led by Crystal Tolley. She works for Sambi and as part of National Geographic grants. And then they were able to generate huge amount of information and recent information. That's another thing that is key. So the KBA require that the information is recent enough to make sure that the species is still present in the area that you are assessing. So of course, there have been several contributions that Hugh is going to present the acknowledgement to all of those. I just wanted to highlight these differences in terms of why the plants have more information than others. So these are just examples nearing to the end of my presentation. So this is an area in northern Mozambique. You may have heard about Palma. So to the north, you can see on the map, to the top right. So that's where we have this KBA, where 14 plants are part of the triggering elements, with the 2 species of freshwater fish and 1 terrestrial reptile. And so all this information is now available on the reports that Hugo is going to present as part of his presentation. As I said, we had terrestrial KBAs, but also we had marine. So this is Grand Bazarut, which is a tourist attraction place, but it's also now based on the species that are there. It's a key biodiversity area as a result of this assessment that we did recently. So these were just a few examples that I wanted to highlight to you, but all the information is now available online, and there are several links presenting that. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and then I think write down your questions, which you may have opportunity to ask them. I think after all they have presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gildo, and we look forward to the day we can call you doctor. Those are very, very insightful slides and very useful to outlining the process that was followed in Mozambique. I'm now going to hand over to Alexandra Bartholomew to present on the Mozambique NCG and the lessons that were learned through establishing that NCG. And just to preempt and say that the establishment of the National Coordination Group is a really important step and a really important body to drive these processes at a national level. And so the lessons from Mozambique are really useful for other countries and to follow. So without further ado, I hand over to Alexandre. Thank you.
Daniel, just to remind everyone that so for the English speakers, that they can use the interpretation button, because Alexandre will speak in Portuguese. So you will have the possibility to listen to the presentation in English. Thank you. Alexandre, por favor.
Bom dia e boa tarde a todos os participantes. Meu nome é Alexandre Bartolomeu, chefe do Departamento de Gestão Ambiental na Direção Nacional do Ambiente, uma das unidades orgânicas do Ministério da Terra e Ambiente. Assim, slide seguinte. Assim, a Direção Nacional, a entidade que preside o Grupo Nacional de Coordenação das Áreas-Chaves, em Moçambique, e este encontro, basicamente, vem em nome do governo, vos explicar como é que este grupo de coordenação das KBAs de Moçambique foi criado e também os passos que se seguiram para a sua constituição e o alcance dos resultados. Em termos da Constituição, inicialmente houve interação entre a equipa do projeto e a Direção Nacional do Ambiente para explicar o que seria o processo de identificação das KBAs e que também requeria a existência de um grupo nacional de coordenação. Também se explicou quais seriam os objetivos principais do grupo, partindo do padrão global da UCN para as KBAs, e também foi fundamental o reconhecimento do papel que a DINAP, neste caso, daria ao grupo. Também foi discutido em termos, ou avaliado, quais seriam as instituições a fazer parte do grupo e também se olhou quais os grupos que existiam, que podiam ser usados ou servir de referência. Neste caso, é o grupo da biodiversidade, o grupo técnico que também havia outro grupo, que era o grupo técnico de trabalho da lista vermelha. E, portanto, concluiu-se que fazia sentido estabelecer o grupo de coordenação das KBAs e que este também deveria incluir a componente de listas vermelhas e resolveu-se iniciar o processo para a sua criação. Claramente aqui é muito importante notar que este grupo teve sua gênese a partir do grupo da biodiversidade e também foi-se ponderar o grupo das KBAs que já existia em termos de revitalização. Passo seguinte. Como qualquer grupo técnico precisa de ter os termos de referência. Foi assim que, com base nos termos de referência usados pelo secretariado, desenvolvidos pelo secretariado das KBAs e também usados em outros países, Moçambique também criou os seus termos de referência. A versão preliminar foi partilhada com a Direção Nacional do Ambiente e com alguns membros potenciais do grupo e para apreciação antes de realizar a reunião para discussão. Em maio de 2019, houve uma reunião com várias inscrições em que foi apresentado o projeto das KBAs e nesta reunião participou também o chefe de secretariado das KBAs e forneceu a introdução do conceito das KBAs e também sobre as parcerias das KBAs. Os termos de referência foram apresentados e discutidos, tendo-se verificado que era necessário maior análise e discussão e que era preciso também incluir mais potenciais membros e daí que se deu um tempo para apreciação e também para agendar uma outra reunião. Os termos de referência foram revistos e discutidos, tópico a tópico, num processo muito longo, em 2 reuniões, para garantir que todos os potenciais membros se sentissem confortáveis com o conteúdo. Estamos a falar de membros de diversos setores e também de diferentes unidades orgânicas dentro do governo que fazem parte e, por isso, tínhamos de partir com consensos para o sucesso. Foi daí que, na 4ª reunião realizada em dezembro de 2019, foi formalmente estabelecido o grupo de coordenação para a lista vermelha e também se estabeleceu o comitê de direção deste grupo. Passo o slide seguinte. Aqui são algumas imagens que falam por si, da reunião de 29 de maio, a seguir de 18 de junho, e também 6 de agosto, das reuniões subsequentes, e a reunião do dia 13 de dezembro, que é a reunião crucial que nos falamos. Slide seguinte. Os propósitos do estabelecimento do grupo grupo de coordenação das KBAs seria principalmente para garantir que o processo fosse de forma inclusiva e representativo e transparente. Neste caso, estamos a referir as áreas-chave para a diversidade, lista primeira de espécies e de ecossistemas, e também o processo para identificar, documentar e delinear as KBAs a nível nacional, apoiando os planos e atividades de conservação, gestão e proteção das KBAs e também das espécies e ecossistemas ameaçados em Moçambique. Este é que é o propósito que Moçambique também abraçou. Slide seguinte. Relativamente à composição do grupo, ou seja, os membros, atualmente o grupo conta com organizações que incluem instituições governamentais, diferentes ministérios, instituições públicas de pesquisa, organizações não governamentais que fazem parte de parcerias e outras interessadas, incluindo representantes do setor privado. Aqui, como podemos ver, estão representados fundamentalmente e esses membros também foram subdivididos em funções que veremos no slide seguinte. A partir do grupo representado por aquelas 22 instituições, tivemos encontros em que se definiu as responsabilidades e os papéis dos membros. Foi neste contexto em que o Ministério da Terra e Ambiente, representado pela Direção Nacional, é a entidade em Moçambique que é hospedaleira deste processo das KBAs em Moçambique. Nessa capacidade de hospedeira, é a presidente, a Dinam, mas também tem como vice-presidente o Instituto Nacional de Investigação Pesqueira, tem como secretariado a WCS, que tem a responsabilidade de apoiar os trabalhos administrativos e de gestão de dados. Também prepara as atas das reuniões e partilha com os membros do grupo, atualiza as listas de membros e também os termos de referência. A seguir temos o ponto focal das KBAs, que é a WWF, que com o apoio da Universidade Eduardo Mondlane, estes são responsáveis por todos os aspectos relacionados com as KBAs, incluindo avaliar propostas enviadas por membros ou proponentes que não façam parte do grupo. Temos também o ponto focal para a lista vermelha das espécies e ecossistemas, que é o Instituto de Investigação Agronômica de Moçambique, que conta com o apoio da Administração Nacional das Áreas de Conservação, e estes são responsáveis por coordenar os aspectos relacionados com as listas vermelhas da UCN. Relativamente à gestão de dados, temos o FNDS, que é o Fundo Nacional de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, com apoio da Fundação para a Conservação da Biodiversidade, a Biofund, que são responsáveis por organizar e disponibilizar as informações desenvolvidas e angariadas pelo grupo. Slide seguinte. Aqui estamos a presenciar as imagens que retratam os principais momentos da discussão dos termos de referência, que era pelos pontos focais das KBAs, como também as reuniões relacionadas com a gestão de dados. E que outras reuniões que o fato ocorrer e notar que o período de desenvolvimento dessas reuniões era período que ainda não estávamos condicionados por Covid-19. Slide seguinte. Em relação à operacionalização do grupo de coordenação, temos a destacar o período que inicia de 2019. Em termos gerais, podemos dizer alguns destaques, que durante 2020 foram realizadas 2 reuniões via online, já estávamos, neste caso, condicionados com o Covid, em junho e em setembro, para discutir as propostas a serem submetidas ao secretariado das KBAs. O grupo avaliou cerca de 41 propostas das KBAs e foram submetidas pelo projeto da WCS e também submetidas 30 ao secretariado. Foram ainda submetidas e aprovadas outras 2 para o caso do Lago Niassa, apresentadas pela UCN e a WWS e também IIP. O grupo acompanhou o processo de avaliação da lista vermelha de cerca de 67 espécies endêmicas ou quase endêmicas de fauna que foram utilizadas para o mapeamento das KBAs e tem vindo também a acompanhar o processo de desenvolvimento do mapa histórico de ecossistemas de Moçambique e respectiva avaliação da lista vermelha. Em março de 2021, foi realizada uma reunião para reconhecer as 29 KBAs finais que foram aprovadas pelo secretariado das KBAs e discutir a apresentação oficial das KBAs do país. É assim que, na sequência dessa reunião, teve lugar a cerimônia oficial do lançamento de KBAs em Moçambique, uma cerimônia oficial das KBAs em Moçambique, que ocorreu no dia 21 de maio, que foi no contexto das celebrações do Dia Internacional da Biodiversidade, uma reunião realizada de modo presencial e também online para abarcar vários interessados e partilhar com outros em Moçambique e a nível mundial. Reconhecer que esta reunião foi presidida pela Sua Excelência, a Ministra da Terra e Ambiente, doutora Ivete Maibas. Assim, com esta reunião nacional e oficial, marcou o momento de reconhecimento formal das KBAs de Moçambique e, avaliado pelo discurso de Sua Excelência a Ministra, Moçambique mostrou que estava cometido para utilizar esta ferramenta para planeamento espacial e não só. Slide seguinte. Em termos de passos subsequentes para este grupo, aqui vamos fazer alguns pontos de realce. Notar que devido ao Covid-19, as atividades do grupo foram limitadas em 2020 e agora é necessário atualizar o plano de trabalhos e que foi desenvolvido e também rever as prioridades do mesmo. Este seria o primeiro passo. O segundo seria que os resultados pedidos para as KBAs e as listas vermelhas estarão disponíveis em breve no novo portal da Biodiversidade de Moçambique, assim como informação sobre o Grupo Nacional de Coordenação. Quero aqui destacar que este grupo os resultados deste grupo a serem colocados no portal da biodiversidade irão servir de cruciais para a valorização nacional e utilização do público em geral, e também como base de informação técnico-científica para informar decisores políticos. Presentemente, este portal está sendo desenvolvido por um projeto irmão do projeto que desenvolveu as KBAs, chamado Projeto Connect, que é coordenado mundialmente pela WCMC, o NEP, na Inglaterra. O terceiro passo é um dos aspectos que o grupo tinha definido como prioridade, é a continuação do treino dos seus membros, de outros especialistas nacionais, e a avaliação das KBAs e de listas vermelhas. Outro momento será o que o grupo vai querer também garantir que o trabalho das KBAs e das listas vermelhas chegue às autoridades provinciais, distritais, e será necessário procurar financiamento para desenvolver workshops a este nível. E, finalmente, os membros do grupo irão continuar a realizar os esforços para angariar fundos de modo a financiar as atividades propostas e outras consideradas prioritárias pelo grupo. E muito obrigado a todos os participantes e também agradecia que colocassem as questões no chat e que é para facilitar a nossa interação. Obrigado.
Thank you very much for that very insightful presentation, very useful presentation, and apologies if we did not introduce you. Clearly at the beginning of your presentation, Alexandre, you are the Chief of Environmental Management Department at DINAB, which is one of the key partners to the NCG. So thank you for that. We really appreciate that insightful presentation on the NCG. We would now like to hand over to Dr. Hugo Costa from WCS, who will present the main outputs of the project in relation with the national and international policy space. Thank you, Hugo. I'm not sure if there'll be translation for your presentation as well.
No, I'll be speaking in English. Can you see my screen just to confirm?
Yes,
okay, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll try to go very fast because we run out of time. So, but this will be a very quick presentation. The objective is just to show you the outputs that we have produced. Okay, so basically we have developed maps and infographics that have been made available to the different institutions. They are currently available at the WCS website, WCS Mozambique website, also at Biofund webpage, but they will be made shortly available at the Ministry of Environment webpage also, and this new biodiversity web portal that is under development and should be online in the next couple of months. Then in terms of reports, we have 4 reports. Okay, sorry, let me just also show my face for those, for those who don't know me. So basically, we have developed 4 reports. The first one describes the whole process. Okay, so it's a comprehensive report, and for those countries that wish to identify KBAs or any institution, this is something. It's kind of a step-by-step guide, a practical guide considering a real example. So of course, each country is specific, and the details are specific, but at least you can take some ideas from here, at least the good ones, and try to copy them for your country. The total, besides this big report with all these details, there are other documents, complementary documents, like a project inception report, the report of the initial KBA training, the initial assessment report of the red list, the initial report on the ecosystem mapping, and the progress report, which can also be consulted. But this one, is kind of a detailed resume of what happened. Then volume number 2 is the one that has got the details for all the KBAs identified in Mozambique. I must highlight that this is only about the 29 KBAs that were approved under our project. There are at least another 2 that were approved through that other project mentioned by Alexandre, by IUCN, WWF, and IAP. And it seems that there is also another transboundary KBA for the Zambezi area. So those are not in this document, but in the future we expect that we'll be able to publish a new version with those other KBAs that will be identified in the meantime. You got details for all the KBAs, fact sheets for each of those KBAs. Then report number 3 and 4, those are in Portuguese only. Just let me tell you that volumes number 1 and 2 are in the Portuguese and English languages, okay? The 3 and 4, which are more country specific, they are just in Portuguese. And these are, one is about the case-by-case recommendations for, guaranteeing the conservation of these KBAs, whether looking at the national legislation, at the categories, the protected area categories that are, that exist for the country, looking at the context of each area, looking at the threats, recommendations are made regarding whether these areas should be protected, or which options exist, or whether it's just a better management that is necessary. And the volume number 4 establishes or explains in detail the relationship or how KBAs and red lists fit into the national policies, strategies, legislation, regulations, and so on. And there is a whole lot of connections established. So KBAs can actually play a major role and as well as red lists on the country's objectives, conservation objectives. Another output of this project was the translation to Portuguese of the guidelines that had already been made available, if I'm not mistaken, early 2018 by the KBA partnership. These are available at IUCN's website. It's the guidelines on business and KBAs, managing risk for biodiversity. We have translated it to Portuguese, and it's now available at IUCN's website and can be used by any Portuguese-speaking country or person, right? Then this other product that it's still not available at the website or online is this huge report. So it's a 400-page report where through almost 2 years, throughout almost 2 years, but mostly for the between November and February this year, March this year, we developed this with a set of regional specialists, international specialists, national specialists, a historical vegetation map for Mozambique. Okay, the former map was from the best one was from 1967. We dated from the 50s. So what these specialists have done is looking at those maps, looking at many other additional sources of information. They have run these new tools with artificial intelligence to with random forests and stuff like that to develop this new map, which is much more detailed than the map that existed in 1967. There were 73 vegetation units. Now we have 152 something like that. And this report shows the maps and describes in detail the characteristics of each of these ecosystems. This is a version 1.0 of the map, and it's not been widely distributed yet because there still needs to be some discussion about some limits, some names of the ecosystems, and that will be done over the next months through a couple of more workshops, and only then it will be made available. So it will be certainly validated at the ministerial level and then be made available like the other products. We also run a red listing of ecosystem assessment for those ecosystems, but because there will be those potential changes, this will need to be run again, okay? And then will be made available at that biodiversity web portal referred by Alexandre. We have a project brochure, which is also a policy brief, and you can find the link here where these materials are available. So besides this, we have two online tools, which I'm going to show you. So one of them is the, I hope you're seeing my screen now. So this is a story map of the project, which shows, you can scroll down and it will show you the story of how the project was developed with all relevant information. And then you have also an atlas. I can show you the English version here, the atlas for the key biodiversity areas in Mozambique. Okay, so with this atlas, you can just select one site in the country, and it will give you the description of that site. It's like it's a bit shorter than the fact sheets that are on volume number 2, but you can just zoom in, see more information about the website, and it will give you here on the left hand side all the information. You can then go to this will then link you to the KBA process, which is that other story map we told you about. These are also available. You can have access to them through our WCS website, and these will all be in the biodiversity web portal. Okay, which is this one. This is slide all about. So this will be a very this portal is being developed, as Alexandre mentioned, with the support of Project Connect from WCMC UNEP. And it will have not only technical information for biodiversity in Mozambique, but also information on legislation, policies, partners, projects, all that information. So it will be also the new, it's kind of a revised platform for the clearinghouse mechanism. That there was a former clearinghouse mechanism website for Mozambique. So this one will be much more than that. It's not only the clearinghouse mechanism website for Mozambique, it's actually a real biodiversity portal which integrates all the information for all conventions, all strategies, etc. So just to finalize, Mozambican institutions can now have access to more funds and investment. As you know, KBA is our priority sites for several funders, donors, and mechanisms such as Jeff. So this is a big advantage for Mozambique now. Of course, that by preserving KBAs, Mozambique will be preserving its ecosystem services like watershed protection, water storage, CO2 retention, emissions reduction, and hopefully also contribute to the better management of fishing grounds, as some of the KBAs are coastal, and this could be used by communities, to transform them in locally managed marine areas or even community conservation areas. So there are some ideas about that in that third report I told you about. And of course, these can be also source of financial benefits for communities, not only for as jobs, if the investment in ecotourism is made, or in any sort of restoration activities. But the thing is that according to the new legislation that is being developed for Mozambique for the biodiversity offsets, for the adequate application of the mitigation hierarchy, KBAs are being defined as offset receiving areas. Okay, so and then communities will be able to benefit under a system of results-based payments. Okay, that is the idea. The legislation has not been approved yet, but it has been in discussion for over a year, and we expect that it will be approved this year. So the next steps, there are more. WCS was able to gather more funds to continue this process of both supporting the National Coordination Group as an active member of the KBA partnership, and that is one of the roles of the partners, as you know, and in this case also as being responsible for the secretariat of the group. Okay, so we have been able to secure funds to continue the supporting the meetings of the group. Some training workshops, and now also the continuation of the work with identification of KBAs. We are trying to secure funds to do field work, because the next step is to go beyond what we have been able to do so far. All the data that was available, or most, I would say a huge percentage, was assessed. But there are at least another 16 areas that were not triggered just because there is not enough information, and they are likely to be triggered. So expeditions need now to be done to the field to get information for these potential trigger species. And just to end, just like to scroll these slides of acknowledgements. This was a huge effort from many institutions, many people who contributed with data, over 100 specialists, dozens of institutions, dozens of people that invested their time. A special thanks to all the technical WCS team and direct partners. They were amazing to get this. Of course, thank you to all our donors, USAID, Speed Plus project about this, also NORAD, AFD, FFM, all the government institutions, some relevant projects such as SECOSUD 2, the TIPAS project from QNIAM, and many others. You can read all this. This is all in the documents. Thank you to the KBA Secretariat. Thank you to everyone who supported our project. That's all. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Hugo. And I think by the list that you've just shown, everyone can see what an extraordinary collaborative project this was. And I've worked closely with you and your team, Hermenegildo and Eduardo, and I know how much work you have put into us. So I just really want to congratulate you, I think, on behalf of everyone who's listening, to an extraordinary job that you've done. I think this has been groundbreaking work for KBA work at a global scale. You've really implemented a project that hasn't been done at this scale before. You've produced some extraordinary results and products. You've demonstrated how to establish national coordination groups, how to make them functional, how to integrate KBAs into policy and prioritization. And I think that's really what KBAs were designed for. So yeah, I just want to take my hat off to all of you and just say a big congratulations, and to your funder, USAID, for funding this innovative work. So thank you, everyone, for those presentations. They were really great. I want to now open up the floor. We are running a bit behind, but we're happy to push beyond 11:30 for those who can stay on the call. But I now open the floor to any questions. If you could raise your hands, I'll do my best to follow them. There were two in the chat that we maybe have lost, but just to highlight them. One was from Harrison in Madagascar, saying they've undertaken a similar project, but they are battling with delineating marine KBAs. And I know Charlotte was on the call, Charlotte Boyd. So if you are still on the call, perhaps you could answer that call. And Andy asked about what are the next steps for those KBAs that are partially or unprotected. I'm trying to see hands. We've got one hand from Simi Bazeng. So Simi, maybe we can take your question, and then I'm going to ask Charlotte to answer the marine KBA question, and perhaps Hugo to answer the question around what's the next steps for the unprotected KBAs. So Simi, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel, and good morning, good day to everyone. Really big congratulations to the Mozambique team and Hugo, Jimenigido, and all those that have led the process. It's going to set a big example to many African countries like Andy showed that are interested in KBA, in the KBA process. One thing that I saw from your presentation is the great consultation with the expert, the different expert groups, the marine, the plants, and the animal group. And also from Andy's opening presentation, where he showed the importance of overlaying those KBA with indigenous people and local community lands. What I was really missing from the presentation is perhaps the consultation with indigenous or local communities. Was there any, or have you done any analysis to find out how these KBAs overlap with indigenous people land? And is there a process to do this?
Thanks.
Thanks.
Over to you, Hugo.
Hermenegildo, do you want to answer this one, to take this one from Simi?
Yes, hi, hi everyone, and hi Sim. So I hope I understood correctly your question. So you wanted to understand the extent to which the KBAs do overlap with community land. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, like the guideline, the KBA guideline stipulates effective consultation with indigenous or local communities will be very important for long-term conservation of key biodiversity areas. So in the Mozambique process, I mean, maybe it's there or I missed it. I haven't seen how or if you did any analysis in terms of that.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for that. So as you see, there are 29 KBAs. Some of them, of course, they do overlap with the communal land. One example I'd like to give is the Namul Mountain, which there's now ongoing sort of initiative with the Legado, working closely with the community. Legado has already identified areas that community can do several things. So because Legado had been there as an institution working closely with community, and it was easy for us to just follow the approach that Legado had taken, to engage with community and work with them to highlight areas that they would like us to set aside for biodiversity conservation. And our delineation of the boundaries for Namul KBA did really take into consideration that information we had from Legado. So yeah, that's one example. The other, the Chumachat KBA is also a community managed area, and then we have taken into consideration that there is a community managing that area, and we through consultation process. Not directly, we didn't go to Chumachat, but working with institutions that are managing those areas, we had several discussions to see how best will be a delineation for those areas. So the answer will be, we had opportunity to engage with the community, not directly with them, but through institutions that are working with those communities. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Gildo. That's a good answer.
Maybe just to add that, of course, Simi, it was not possible doing a national wide exercise to do that for all KBA. So the example of Hermenegildo is also applicable to other examples where the delineation processes or of potential protected areas or so on were already in place, or there were institutions there, and that was the process followed. For other areas, we were not able at this stage to do those consultations, but of course on the following steps, so if these areas are to be effectively managed, that will need to be done. If some of the limits will need to be revised, then that needs to be done. We need to be realistic. So that just to add that on what Hermenegildo said. Thanks.
Thank you, Hugo. I'm going to move on to the next question. Charlotte, maybe if you could answer this question from Harrison and Remy. I'm going to combine their questions around marine KBAs. And the questions are, how does one delineate marine KBAs, and particularly how do you consider migratory species in that context?
Great, so thank you. Those are huge questions. So delineation in general is often very context specific. So it's kind of a craft really to take the information that you have on the trigger species or ecosystems, what you know about the ecology of the species, think about how to delineate around the area that is important for the species. And then you need to think about, well, how would it be possible to manage this area in the future? So having started with your ecological boundaries, you may refine them to create management areas that could actually or potentially be manageable as a unit. And the principles are definitely the same in marine systems as in terrestrial systems, but it's really going to depend on the species in particular and their spatial ecology. So you can imagine you might have, say, coral reef species that have a defined depth limit or temperature limit that can be fairly well, their ecological footprint could be fairly well mapped. And then maybe you think beyond that and decide that, well, it would be for management purposes, we need to expand beyond that area. For other species, marine species, obviously you have a high degree of connectivity in the ocean. You have many highly migratory species. So there we really need to think about, are there specific sites that are important for specific times in the life cycle? And again, those specific sites are often can be delineated in terms of bathymetry, water temperature, other often sort of biophysical aspects that we can map fairly reliably. There's often, marine sites will often be more, or the habitat of marine species is often more dynamic than for terrestrial species. And so we need to work to accommodate that. So maybe expand the site so it's a bit larger so it can accommodate that interannual variability. But I'm trying to answer briefly a huge question. I'd be happy to have further discussions and chat about it some other time. I don't want to take up all the rest of the discussion time.
Okay, good. Thanks, Charlotte. And sorry, I didn't introduce you. For those who don't know Charlotte, she chairs the Standards and Appeals Committee for the KBA Secretariat. So you are the expert on delineation. Thank you for that. I'm just going to now quickly take another question that was posted in the chat by Florian Werner from the GIZ. And his question is really around, in terms of comparing to other types of spatial prioritization that was previously done, were there any surprises that came out of this exercise that really jumped out of you when comparing to previous efforts to prioritize in Mozambique? I'm not sure who wants to take that question.
I can take that one, and then if he wants to complete. So look, at the national level for Mozambique, we can't say that. Well, there was one exercise we can't say that there is still a biodiversity priorities mapping hasn't been done yet. Actually, in my slide, I didn't speak about it, but we are one of the next steps, and we have been developing a proposal with SAMBI, a regional proposal exactly to move into that direction and make a biodiversity priorities mapping for Mozambique at the national level. Putting more focus on KPAs, on red lists, ecosystem mapping, etc. But the areas that were triggered, the 29 areas, a significant percentage is already protected. So what happened this time, is that the information, there was information available. There was more information available than we actually thought at the beginning. And but most of the the information is for areas that were already known somehow, either by being protected areas or by being areas that were known to be important for biodiversity. So of course there was a match with those, although there were some surprising areas which were less known, but revealed really important. So as key biodiversity areas. So answering directly to the question, yes, there was an overlap with some areas previously known either as being already protected because they were important, and this proves that those areas, those protected areas, are really important at the global level, and also with other sites that were good already knew as being very important. Very few based on systematic conservation planning. I guess one or two sites in the south of the country where those kind of analyses were run, and then further to the north areas where expeditions had been made, and that's sometimes more than one, and for which it was already forecasted that the area would be extremely relevant by the species that were identified there, many of them with new species for science and so on. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Hugo. I'm going to ask Andy's question now, Hugo, for you to answer that. But Andy, I'm going to ask you to perhaps think about answering Tabita's question around whether an NCG can serve another foreign country for a limited time, and in what aspects of the process is that possible. But Hugo, perhaps you could just answer Andy's question around what are their plans for the partially or unprotected KBAs, very briefly. Thanks.
Okay. Look, these are different processes, right? So this was a project to identify the KBAs. The National Coordination Group has the role. It's part of the role to support exactly that type of initiatives. So that would be another sort of initiative. I guess this project that we are planning with SAMBI and the Mozambican government, and also the National Director of Environment, will be key to then use KBAs in a systematic conservation planning exercise to define, and then present that to the government, and the government can then determine which of these areas could be expanded and be part of the national network of protected areas, for example. There are some targets in the NBSEP. For example, it says there that up to 2025, if I'm not mistaken, all the endemic Afro-montane areas above 1,000 or 1,000 and something meters will need to be integrated in the national network of protected areas. And the several or I would say that the most relevant of all those areas were probably triggered as KBAs in this phase. So I guess those would be priority. But then there are many others, and that's why we've developed this volume 3, which kind of gives options, give clues on how these areas could be protected. But it's another process. But it's definitely that I'm sure that the group, the National Coordination Group, will try to push forward, as well as all the partners. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for that. Andy, I don't know if you can.
Sorry, Daniel. And I forgot something really, really important. Is that the National Territorial Development Plan, and that has been developed over the past 2 years, has already integrated KBAs as avoidance areas for projects that can cause significant impacts in those areas. And also this, I also mentioned this new legislation I was talking about for biodiversity offsets, where these KBAs can be offset receiving areas, and that will include gazetting them as official protected areas, okay? And then the National Spatial Marine Plan currently underway is taking the same approach. So it's also defining KBAs as a kind of a tier 2 in terms of maritime space, you know. So it means that, okay, they are not priority over some activities, but they can condition a significant number of stuff. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for that, Hugo. After Andy, I think we're just going to take 1 or 2 more questions if there are any. So please post them or raise your hand. Andy, are you able to answer the question from Tabita around the NCG serving other countries?
Yes. Our idea of setting up KBA national coordination groups is that by forming such groups, and as you can see from the work in Mozambique, that forming such a group brings everyone together and also pushes KBAs in policy nationally. So I don't really see a national coordination group from one country really supporting another country, because it wouldn't really be able to play that role. You can have individual proposers proposing KBAs from within a country. You don't have to form the national coordination group, but what we see the national coordination group doing is better coordinating all the different people with interests in biodiversity and helping make these comprehensive assessments across multiple taxonomic groups.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that answers the question, Tabita, but yeah, it would be difficult. And the NCG is really there to drive the process in the long term, which I think Mozambique has shown a good example of how well it can be structured to do that. I don't see any other questions or hands raised. All right, more comments in the comment box, but I think that seems to be it in terms of questions. So we could potentially wrap up then. So I think, yeah, just once again, thank you to all the presenters. Really, really useful presentation. I think we've taken a lot away from this. Mozambique has shown us the entire package from beginning to end in terms of how we identify a network of KBAs, and it's ongoing work. But the NCG is a really important first step. Setting up an NCG, having the right stakeholders and experts on board, particularly having the right government departments on board, is really important for driving the process, but also then further getting KBAs into the respective policy space. Then having the underlying data, the fact that you undertook a national red list assessment, I think was a really important component to making sure you had the right underlying data to identify these sites. And as was pointed out, we need the most recent reliable information to delineate KBAs. So it is a really important component. And then the extraordinary list of experts that you had involved in the process, I think also is just a really good example of how broad and collaborative a process this needs to be. I think from my personal perspective, the value of KBAs to countries is really large on a number of different levels. It's as pointed out, it speaks to prioritization in our landscape, where we should be expanding our protected areas, where we should be mitigating development impacts and prioritizing, integrating it into the mitigation hierarchy, as was pointed out, into offset receiving areas. So there are a number of uses for KBAs in the landscape in terms of prioritization. And as Andy pointed out, there's a lot of work going into trying to get KBA specifically mentioned in the post-2020 targets, particularly target 2, when we want to expand our protected and conserved areas, making sure that that happens in the right places. But even post that, when we speak to effectiveness, and there's going to be a really big push for effectiveness in our protected and conserved areas, especially. KBAs can be a really important component in informing that monitoring of effectiveness in terms of being an important input to assessment tools such as MET and IMET that are used in the Southern African context. In terms of identifying, in terms of guiding where we want to identify OECMs, other effective area-based conservation measures, and also then in terms of the green list and being an important input to the green list, speaking to that component of conservation outcomes, making sure that these key KBA trigger species are persisting into the future is a good indication that we are achieving our conservation objectives at a site. So those are just some of the key values of KBAs at a national level. But I think we are a bit over time, so I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if Hugo, if you perhaps just want to send us off and I'll hand over to you to say goodbye to everyone. But you can see on the slide there, I just have to punt the KBA community. If you want to join the KBA community for further updates, information, please do so on any one of these platforms or email us directly. Hugo, do you want to close us off?
Okay, Daniel,
yes,
thanks a lot.
Excuse me before Hugo. Yeah. Excuse me before Hugo. I just wanted to point out that the NCG plays a really key role on this process. It's a sort of another layer on your process of identifying KBAs. In Mozambique, for example, we submit to the NCG, I think there were 41 proposals. And then the NCG has taken a thorough analysis, thanks to Eduardo Videira and Natasha Ribeiro. And then from that process, we were only able to take forward 30 KBAs, and those 30 KBAs are the one that had been submitted to the regional focal point. And Daniel, with colleagues, worked also tirelessly to analyze and verify those proposals. And then we only, in the end, had 29 approved. So it's a really key component of the KBA identification process, having the NCG. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to also to raise that because that question of whether a national coordination group could be supporting other country, I don't feel that is possible unless just the exchange of experiences concept. You know, a country which wants to establish NCG can contact another one that has already established, and then have this exchange of experience visit or by meetings, by virtual meetings. That I think will be helpful, you know, and I advise you also to read our volume 1, and you can get maybe some ideas. But you know, just that, more than that, then it needs to be at the national level. Otherwise, I don't think it's possible. So yeah, I just want to close by thanking again everyone, to the Secretariat for all the support that gave to our team, Irmenegildo, our technical coordinator, Eleuterio, our project assistant, and who took a great part of the job, all our data management assistants, all the specialists that were part of this process, the group specialists, and then the others that just contributed from from other projects and their places. That was excellent. You know, all the institutions, that collaboration, the government played a major role here. All the institutions from the government, all the members of the National Coordination Group, these institutions supported a lot in all the process. So that collaborative effort was essential, and we wouldn't be here if it weren't them. So thank you a lot. Thank you to our donors, USAID, Speed Plus, NORA, the AFD, FFM, all those that supported this project. And we hope that we can continue this work and also collaborate with other countries in the region. And outside the region, if that's also useful. Thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity of the KBA community, and wish you all the best.
Good. Thanks, Hugo, and have a good day, everyone. We will make the recording available.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone, thanks.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.